I'm Claudette. And this is Cloud, Coffee and Code.
Very good friend. She's like a sister to me. Her name is Bren Herrera. She's a Washington D.C. Private chef. I have a whole write up on you here, Brenda. But it feels weird trying to introduce you as like private chef.
Oh, you don't have to do all
that. I gotta be like, that's my sister. So, but she's a Washington D.C. private chef. She's a lifestyle expert. She's the author of Modern Pressuring Cooking, which I have right here with me. You may have seen her showing off her cooking skills on the Today Show with people like Carson Daly, Kathy Lee. Yeah. And then before all that, before she was famous, Bren, she attended UVA with a vision she was going to become a lawyer. Although after she left, she went into Capitol Hill and left Capitol Hill behind. And she now, although she did leave Capitol behind, she has never stopped fighting for and defending social injustices against women, immigrants, and people of color. Here she is, entrepreneur Bren Herrera. Bren, thank you so much for joining me.
I should also say bro too instead of saying hi, Roy.
That's right. So let's jump in. So first, for those that don't know, right? So like I grew up with Bren. I grew up in her house.
Really?
Her mom taught me Spanish. Like taught me about like Cuban culture, like food. Like I grew up eating real Cuban food, which was great. And so I saw a side of you before you were I saw going to be lawyer Bren, right? And so I've never really had that conversation with you. That was part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the show is to talk about your path, because you were I'm going to be lawyer Bren, and then we all kind of grew up, and then now you're like on Today's Show Bren, and then like cooking, like writing books. And so like I wanted to have that conversation with you as to that path to entrepreneurship and what that was like, and you didn't just change careers, you flipped, like you.
I went in a whole other direction, but I'm so glad that you not just kind of have been watching and paying attention and observing, but kind of knew the trajectory of what it was. But yeah, I mean, we grew up together, so you know what my family dynamic is like and how I was raised in a home where we're going to become professionals, which is why Karen's a doctor and my brothers are in IT, and George has this great career in logistics in Florida. So for me, it was a very natural thing to want to go into law, particularly because I fell in love with like the Perry Mason shows and just was always just intrigued by the art of debating. And that has to do with my relationship with my dad and him having been a political journalist his entire life. So yeah, I mean, I went to UVA and then I started law school, and then I was like, you know what, let me sit out and just kind of get my feet wet and work in law, and then decide if I want to go back. So I deferred my admission to DePaul Law School. In the meantime, I took I started a program at Georgetown. So I kind of got, I'm not gonna say complacent, but I kind of got really comfortable in law. And so I did that for 12 years, and I did a lot of, I did corporate securities for the most part, a lot of civil litigation. And I had the distinct opportunity of doing associate work because I was the only paralegal in the 2 or 3 major law firms that I worked in. And so, yeah, man, my job was corporate, 9 to 5. I did a lot of IPOs, a lot of securities work. We would go into trial when I did my last stint at the last law firm where we did civil and criminal litigation. And so, yeah, my job was very much Washington, K Street, 17th Street, suited up, 9 to 7. And I got laid off in 2005. So it wasn't even this orchestrated, well thought out transition into entertainment and lifestyle. It was literally like I got a yellow slip, if that's the color for layoffs. And I was like, I am not going back to corporate America at all. Like, this is my one opportunity to really go for what I know. And I had 0 savings because I was very young. I didn't anticipate this happening.
Right.
And I just prayed.
Do though, like that's, nobody anticipates, right?
For real. Yeah.
Nobody thinks about having to, what you're going to do if you ever get laid off, because we don't believe that's ever going to happen to us. Right. And so that's not a unique position to not have any savings, right? Like that, and so not having any savings, you're laid off, and so what you're just like in the back of your mind, you're like, this is my opportunity. I'm gonna do like I did what Dad said. Now I'm like gonna go to entrepreneurship. Is that kind of the thought process, or talk me through that?
No, it wasn't even entrepreneurship. Honestly, it was just kind of like entertainer. Like I have always wanted to sing professionally, having been classically trained on vocals and cello, and having been, overseas performing. So for me, really, it was my opportunity to go be this performer and entertainer. So I moved to Atlanta where I was singing professionally, and I used to bounce around different clubs, and I started recording an album, and I went overseas and performed. But being an indie artist does not pay the bills. It didn't pay the bills back in 2005. So I had to quickly figure out how was I going to like make it work in Atlanta, because to have left DC where my entire world was then, and obviously is still now, I had to figure out, I was like, it has to work. Otherwise, having left DC was almost in vain. So the transition to food happened very organically. It wasn't planned. And I found myself cooking for a celebrity in Atlanta for this one big event. And literally, Roy, that changed everything. I got a phone call from Emeril Lagasse in March of 2008 after having been in front of a whole bunch of culinary media in Atlanta. And yeah, I got a phone call. It was actually from the Washington Post. Said that Emeril was looking for talent for this new show he was doing on Discovery Network. I flew back up to Atlanta in April of 2008. And after that appearance, literally everything kind of blossomed as I know it today in the culinary space. So that's when I was like, oh, I need to do this for myself. And the blog started, and I started cooking professionally for people and clients and blah, 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 blah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
I have seen you on TV. I mean, obviously you're on Today's Show and everything like that, but I've seen you on those cooking competition shows. Right. You had that. It was like. Was it Guys Grocery? Yeah. I'm a sucker for the food.
For cooking shows, yeah. I think we. I mean, you can learn so much, and they're so much fun to watch and kind of see, especially the competitive ones, because you just never know what's really going on behind the scenes. But I'm here to tell you, when I did Guys Grocery Games, it literally, whatever you see on TV is literally what happens behind the scenes. Like, we had no idea what we were going to be making until we got there. We had no idea what the lay of the land was for Guy's Grocery Store, which is a legit grocery store. And then, yeah, you get 30 minutes. There's like a big clock that says 30 minutes and it's counting down. There is no stopping the clock. So when you guys go to commercial break, we're literally working in real time. Wow. It was crazy. It was intense, but I had an amazing time. And Guy was so incredibly nice and polite and welcomed me back. And the fun part was that Rev Run from Run DMC was one of the judges.
That's right. That's right. He was.
Rev Run. Yep.
So let's talk about your book real quick. So
yeah.
Obviously you grew up in a family that cooks, right? And
yeah.
So I like I said in the intro, I remember being in your kitchen and your mom just shoving food in my face, right? Like that's a big part of your family, right? And so you said that you had cooked, you had cooked for an event, and that kind of was what took the next step. But what led to the book? Like what was like, you know what, I'm gonna push out and put everything in pressure cooking into a book.
So when I worked in law, I worked at Pepper Hamilton, which at the time I was doing employment litigation, but also some patent and trademark work. And downstairs, have you been to the Hamilton, which is a really big restaurant on the corner of 14th and like F&G?
I don't know that I have. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I
don't. It's a really big, like, all-Americana restaurant. And I used to work in that building on the 5th floor. So for lunch, I used to go downstairs to the Borders bookstore, it was Borders Books. And I used to spend my entire lunch in the music section, just kind of listening and studying new music, but also in the cookbook section. And I was always fascinated, Roy, by people's ability to put recipes in a beautiful format, and people would actually buy cookbooks. Because I remember as a child, my mom would feed us 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. And my mom had all the amazing cookbooks that kind of, tailored to children, because it's 5 of us, as you know. Right. So just kind of being in that environment of food, and family fun and family dynamic, I naturally fell in love with food. So I always said one day I'm going to write a book, even if I stay in law. Like, it was always a dream of mine to write a book for my mother. It wasn't even necessarily for me. It was like, I want to be able to do this for my mom and just kind of curate and preserve, our culture through recipes. So I was already blogging. I had moved back to DC from Atlanta, and a lot of things that I was working on down there weren't working out for me, like the TV shows. I had auditioned for Food Network 4 times. I got called back 3 of those 4 times, and I made it to the final round and then got cut. So I was just really frustrated. And when I moved back to DC in 2011, I was like, all right, I need to figure out what my next step as an entrepreneur, because my blog was doing really well and the cooking for brands and being a recipe developer was going really well, but it wasn't where I wanted it to be. So no lie, I got a random email from a publisher in June or July of 2014, around there. And they were like, hey, we found your work. We've been following your blog and on social, namely Instagram. And we just love your vibe. And we want to know if you're interested in writing a cookbook. And boy, when I tell you, I was at my parents' house sitting in the front yard, and my mouth just my jaw just dropped, because I was like, there's no way. Like, there's no way that a random publisher found me randomly through IG offering me a cookbook deal. And serendipitously, it worked out that they were specifically looking for a pressure cooking author and chef. And I'm like, I'm your girl.
Right.
So I swear to goodness, like, it all happened that organically. So I talked to my lawyer about it. We kind of negotiated the terms, and voila, in November of 2016 or December 2016, I published Modern Pressure Cooking, which is an homage to the culture and my love affair for pressure cooking. I'm so glad you have a copy.
Of course I have a copy. I got mine off of Amazon, but Barnes & Noble, I walked into Barnes & Noble, and I went over to the cooking section, and yours wasn't there. I was like, that's messed up, man. So I walked over and I grabbed one and put it on the
Thank you.
I was like, what are y'all doing? Y'all don't know what you're doing.
They don't know. They don't know what
they didn't know. All right, so you grew a brand, right? I mean, that's ultimately that's what this was, right? Was
right.
You were growing your brand, and things came out of that, right? And you just kind of followed the path down and had the passion and the know-how on how to do some of these things. And so growing a brand, and you talked about a blog, you talked about IG, so that's all technology, right? And utilizing technology. And so how important is technology to growing a brand, specifically your brand? Obviously, TV is a large part of what you do, but how important is technology in growing a brand and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
It's really interesting you mentioned that, because when I first started blogging for food and travel, which at the time was called Flamboyant Eats, which is a word flan and being, a flamboyant personality or whatever. And so Blogspot was the main platform then, which old head bloggers will remember that. The new kids won't know. They'll be like, what is Blogspot? But it was a Google platform, and it was free. And there was a certain, I think, bandwidth, limit or whatever. But that was really my first entry point into technology and really understanding how technology is so necessary for having a brand and also being present in front of your audience and your customer and your consumer. So then I quickly moved out of Blogspot when my blog started growing, and I got my own domain, and I hired a web developer and a graphic designer. So all these things, are part of the tech world and contribute to how a brand starts their growing process and developing their presence online. So now, today, 2020, it's crazy how, tech has exponentially changed the way that we operate. I don't know anybody who doesn't interact with and consume technology. Even if you're a 70-year-old like my parents, you are literally on your phone all day long, consuming information that's delivered to you through technology. So for me, as a lifestyle and entertainment brand, technology is important in that you just have to know what the up and up is on a daily basis to know how you can leverage the different platforms and the different tools to stay relevant, to stay on top of the game. And so when I have team members with whom I work, like my graphic designer now and my web developer now, I have a system where we stay organized, and they know what the workflow looks like, and they know what timelines are for certain projects, when they need to get turned in or whatever. So even though I'm not in technology myself per se, it's not my career, I definitely, obviously rely on technology, probably more than anything else, to make all this work. And you and I are communicating through, my webcam, and, your studio on a microphone through your webcam on Facebook Live. So it's It's so interwoven into our everyday lives. I mean, look, you got Alexa, you got smart refrigerators that kind of do everything for you. So I respect technology, and I need technology. I wish that I were a little more involved on kind of like the day-to-day. Like, I feel like I probably could have had a successful career in technology.
It's never too late to start.
No, man, I'm good. Like, I love entertaining people, and they're a big picture here. But yeah, I mean, look, you know my brothers well. They're your boys. They're your brothers. You know, they're in technology, and I'd love to see them thriving in the IT space, because it's not, I honestly don't think it's anything that they both thought that they would actually get into, but they love it, and I love watching them grow in it.
Yeah, and so you see, so that gets into the tech industry, right? Whereas we had conversations prior to this. You know, we've had this conversation a few times, right? Is that when you get into the tech industry, it's largely controlled by white and Asian people, right?
Men,
really, right? And so we're a woman-owned tech company, right? And so only 5% of tech startups are women-owned. 5%.
Yeah, I knew that. And even when you look at so finish your thought, and then I had like this remarkable stat for you, but yeah.
So 5% are women-owned, right? And then when you start getting into minorities, it gets even, the statistics are just as low, if not lower, right? And even when you get into the workforce, right? I think it's something like 30% or 25 to 30% of the tech workforce is female. And then here, I have some of these numbers in front of me. So when you look into 83% are men, 60% of that is white, right?
60, yeah, crazy.
30% is Asian, right? So that's 90%. That means 10%.
10% is left to women, right?
The rest, right? Is the
rest. Or the rest. I mean, right? The rest, everybody. Yeah.
Which is absolutely crazy, right? And so I actually have a couple of these stats here, right? So 25% of IT jobs are held by women. 30% of computer programmers are women, right? So IT jobs expands into like marketing and then HR, right? They're just technology, right? But when you actually get into programming, 30% are women, right? 21% of computer software engineers are women. That's specific to software. 22% of computer and information systems managers are women. And if you think about the workforce of women, 59% of the workforce is female. So when you hear 22% and 21%, some people, when they hear that, they're like, oh well, I don't know, whatever. They'll make excuses, right? But when you get into 59% of the workforce as a whole is female, you're talking about some very skewed,
huge gaps, right?
Huge gaps. And then when you get into here's diversity in tech, we've talked about Yahoo, we talked about Facebook, Google, right, LinkedIn, Amazon, all these companies, right? So Yahoo, 89% is white or Asian. Facebook, 91% is white or Asian. Google, 91. LinkedIn, 91. Amazon, it's tough that the reporting through Amazon, Twitter, and Apple. But that's all race. If you look into male or female, 37%, 31%, 30%, 39%. It doesn't matter if it's female, if it's minority. It's the drastic skew of this is completely out of hand. And so you had sent me an article that I honestly had not ever thought about or looked into before.
Yeah.
And it has to do with venture capitalism. So I have no experience with VCs, but I believe the article that you sent me, the statistic is what, 1%?
1%.
1% of venture capitalists are black, right? And so,
but we have to also consider. So a couple of things that I considered when I read that article. So let me back up. The numbers that you just showed they're alarming. They are reality. I live in that space every day, so I know. So for 59% of the entire workforce to be composed of us, but we only occupy 25% of that, is it's disheartening and creates a bigger problem, right? So how do we fill those gaps? That's one conversation. Yep. But when you talk about minorities, women, and then Black people, Latinos in tech, when you look at specifically VCs, and I used to do VC work back. Are you familiar with the Motley Fool? Yeah. I don't think I've ever talked about this. So I took Motley Fool public. I was part of the very small team, at the firm where I worked, where we took Motley Fool public. I've been meaning to reach back out to them just to kind of see what kind of behind the scenes work I can do with them in terms of just kind of getting my feet into some of the VC work that they do. But it was a very exciting time. Like Silicon Valley was just taking off. This was in like very mid to late 1990s. Silicon Valley was just taking off, and a lot of these small tech companies were going public. So we were doing a lot of VCs, a lot of, A and B series fundraising for them. So it's so ironic now that I did that a very long time ago, and now as a Black and Latina woman, we are so underfunded and we're so underrepresented, both when it comes to being financial advisors, but also venture capitalists. And then obviously the lack of access to actual money and funds to create our businesses to stay in that space.
Yeah, I had never thought of that, right? I mean, when you get into technology, you get into entrepreneurship, and you get into startups, those numbers alone are, alarming as to what the difference is between, not only the diversity, but the diversity in the sexes, right? So it's, men are, white and Asian men are
dominate. Yeah,
I mean, it's ridiculous how much they dominate, right?
But I think one of the really interesting things about that article that was uncovered for me, which I did not realize, were all the justifications for which these companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, has the highest rate of minority, specifically Black leadership, not just workforce. But when you look at these major tech companies and how they are built and how they continue to grow their workforce, it's that good old boys network, right? You come in through referrals, you come in through word of mouth, or you can vouch for somebody. That is very typical in that white boy, old network mentality. We don't necessarily have that. We don't have access to that old boy network system that is, institutionally set up that way. So one of the points in the article, which I found to be really interesting, was that one of the reasons, or that they justify not having more Black or Latino people, not just men, in IT and technology, is because we just don't have that infrastructure of having a network of people that can vouch for us. And so they just kind of brush it away and explain it away that way. And then there's the whole HBCU thing. It's not that there's a lack of undergrad students or even grad students in technology. There are plenty of Black students, men and women and Latino, in STEM programs. These big companies, what they're not doing is bringing in and retaining students from HBCUs. So they're just kind of overlooking an entire applicant pool that could really contribute to a more balanced workforce that's more representative of the actual workforce as it is.
Yeah, I'm quoting this article. So this is an article from the LA Times.
Yeah.
And
Such
so,
a good article.
Yeah, I'll send a link out to the article so everybody can understand what it is that we're talking about. But I'll quote it directly. It says tech leaders have often pointed to a pipeline problem, right? Which would seem like a realistic possible solution, right? When you're talking about, oh well, they're just not going to school to study for that. Sure, I guess.
Right.
And so, but in 2016, it was something like 8.6% of graduates graduated with a bachelor's degree in computer and information science, right? And 10% were Latino. So there is 18% of the graduating class that focused on computer and information science were people of color, right? And so now we get back to 91%. Something doesn't add up.
Yeah, completely.
And then,
well, that goes to how they talked about, just business practices right before this whole George Floyd thing. And I referenced that because it was a point in the article as well, that these companies have vouched to now invest $100 million, upwards even $1 billion, from a Chinese company that want to put money into more diversification in their workforce. But this has been an ongoing problem for decades, at least as long as I've been in, working for myself for the last 15 years now. They commit to doing these things, but then they don't, because they fall within that blueprint of, like you said, of the way that the system works for them. So what is it going to take for, the boardrooms? This is a big conversation that's happening now, right? What is it going to take for these boardrooms of all companies, not just in tech, to really look at their workforce and say, how can we diversify our employment pool, specifically in leadership, not just, I don't want to say bottom of the barrel, but, services, right? Service level employees. That gap has got to get closed, because there's not a deficiency in the pool, right? There are plenty of people who are, skilled enough, have degrees in technology that can fill these roles, but they're just not being retained. Look, I've got 3 really, really good friends in IT. 3 in leadership roles. One is a senior, actually he's in a leadership role too. He's a senior graphic designer for Facebook. He used to be at Google. He's now at Facebook. And black guy, lives in California, and he talks about this all the time. So he has been very intentional about retaining and making sure that his particular team is mostly people of color, both men and women. So kudos to my boy Melvin out in California. Like I said, he's now with Facebook, but he tells and talks often of the disparity and the lack of representation in these big companies. And then 3 of my other friends are with different tech companies around the country who are in leadership positions. And I don't know what their teams look like per se and who reports to them, but those are 3 people out of the thousands of black men and women that I know,
Well, yeah, and I think there's an important solution. There's an important point to be made about this, right? Is that just because you went to school to get a degree in computer science or anything like that doesn't mean those are the only people who can get a tech job, right?
Sure.
Look at did either of your brothers graduate?
No, not at all.
I'm a software engineer. I have a degree in communication. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's a very important part of this is after we've graduated, right? It doesn't matter what you've graduated in. Tech is, we talked about it earlier, tech is in everything, right? You have to be savvy in technology. You have to use it in all aspects of business and life, right? And so you can go out and get a certification, $150, right? And recruiters are looking for that. So if you're a woman or a person of color who wants to get into the tech industry, seek out. There's tons of different programs that you can get into, things that you can study. You can pay $25 a month for some of these online courses, and then take that certification, and then put your resume in front of some of these people, and it'll strengthen it big time. And then if we're still not hitting those numbers, chopping away at those numbers, then there is a much larger conversation to be had.
Yeah, but I think that your stats underscore what we're talking about here, and so does that article. So it's not so much that these people aren't applying. It's not so much.
Absolutely, I'm not saying that. No, yeah, I'm not saying.
I feel like the issue has to be resolved at the very top, again, in these boardrooms and the people who are making the decisions as to who they're employing. So where's that? How do we close that gap, and who's responsible for literally, generally speaking, uprooting the system so that it's more inclusive and more representative of what the general force looks like? Here's a little off topic but related, which affects me personally as a black woman and as a Latina in business. The black female demographic is launching the most startups in America, far from Silicon Valley, and we are yet still the most underfunded group of people. So we are starting more than any other group. We are starting the most startups in this country, and we are still yet the most underfunded. So back to the whole VC, like the access is just not there. So we're ready and available, right, and willing and want to occupy the space, but the system is just, the infrastructure is just not designed to support us in that way. Like, I can personally tell you, I've been in the process of launching a multimedia company for the last 3 years. And Roy, my biggest setback has been one personal one, which is asking for help, right? Like, I've along the way lost that girth and that like in your face that I had when I was in my 20s. And that just kind of comes from experience and whatever. But that's a personal thing that I take on. But 2, just again, the lack of resources and information that there is out there to support my endeavors in wanting to build a multimedia, multi-million-dollar media company, which I know that I can do. Like, I'm multilingual and I am incredibly talented. So there's no reason why I can't. It's just having access to the money, and the money comes vis-a-vis those relationships, at least according to how the current system is set up.
Yeah, I don't, like I said before, I don't have much experience in the VC world. I've had a few come to us, cloud computing and stuff like that. Like it's a hot market these days, apparently.
Sure.
And so they come to us, and I've interacted with them a few times, but like I don't really know much about them. I've read a few books and stuff like that, but some of these. So we're kind of harping on like a little bit of the problem, or a lot of the problem, right? But I also want to make clear that since there are a lot of people who do listen to this show and that are either entrepreneurs or looking to start a small business, do your research as far as what your resources are, because the SBA can be your friend. Now, it's not the solution, but it can can definitely help you.
No, I'll tell you this. When I was in Atlanta and I was developing some product for Dean and DeLuca, I used to be a food writer for them, and I was going to develop some food product. And so the SBA, for your listeners, particularly your female listeners or your minority listeners, the SBA has tremendous programs that offer resources, free mentorship, free business advice. They will help you do your business plan. They will help you understand how to scale your business. They will help you understand if your product is even marketable and should be in the market, market penetration. They'll help you do some market analysis. So there's a particular program called SCORE, SCORE. I'm not sure what the acronym stands for, but
just about to say that.
SCORE. Yeah, SCORE is really, and I know all of this because my dad used to work at the SBA. And so it wasn't a conflict of interest, but because he worked at the SBA, I had a couple of personal connections there that he was able to send me to. But they have a tremendous amount of resources for women and minorities, particularly small businesses, obviously, or especially minorities in small business, where they can help you get that process started, at least understanding where you can go. They can provide you information where you can go get funding with, small banks or banks that focus specifically on minority-owned businesses, female-owned businesses, et cetera. So that's definitely a really good starting point. Like you said, it's not the solution, but it's a solid resource for sure.
Yeah, there's the scores. We've used scores. We have a score mentor. It's great. It's a great resource. When you can just bounce ideas off of them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's free. Like they offer these services and this information for free, which is great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. If you haven't looked it up, make sure you guys check that out. Yeah. So Bren, we're right at our 30-minute mark, which
we can talk about this for like another 2 hours. Wow.
Let's just keep going. But so before we get out of here, I always offer it up for people to say, hey, how can people reach you? How can people get in touch? How can people buy your book? Tell us how we can get in touch with Bren.
Well, one, I just want to thank you, Roy. You know that I adore you, and you and your family mean so much to me. I mean, you guys have literally known Roy since yay high, as we say here in Virginia, yay high. Right. But yeah, and I'm so proud of you, man. Like, congratulations on having a woman-owned company in technology. You're bringing in more females in and just representing our group. So that's amazing, and I will do my part in supporting you and making sure that my audience knows that you guys offer cloud computing and solutions as well. So you can find me everywhere. BrenHerrera.com is my website. And then on all these technical or these tech savvy platforms, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, and TikTok is like this new crazy thing that I got on TikTok like 2 months ago. I've done 2 dances and I'm like, I don't have time for that. Like, it's time consuming because it's entertaining, but I finally got on TikTok. I haven't done anything much with it at all, but the major platforms that I use for business purposes are IG, Facebook, Twitter, and I'm Bren Herrera across the board. And then my website, BrenHerrera.com, which is actually going through an upgrade and rebrand and all that stuff, because you got to stay on top of the time.
You got to keep it up. Right? So everybody out there, go get her book, Modern Pressure Cooking. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it, anywhere, right? So
anywhere. Yeah, I appreciate that, bro.
Yeah, of course, I got you. So Bren, thank you so much for coming on. I really very much appreciate it, and I'm proud of everything you're doing. Like, you're like a big sister to me. I love it. So guys, next week, first, thank you again to Bren for coming on. So guys, next week we have Jo Jorgensen. She is the Libertarian presidential candidate. She'll be on next week with me to talk about her policies, the third-party option. So make sure you guys are checking that out. Again, you can always listen to Cloud Coffee and Code podcast everywhere where podcasts are heard. We're on YouTube. We're on iTunes. We are on Spotify. My producer's yelling at me for giving up the surprise that Jo Jorgensen's going to be on next week, but oh well. But yeah, you guys can listen on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Of course, we're on Facebook. So guys, we'll see you next week. Thanks again for hanging out. Thanks again, Bren.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next week.